Mike Rose from tinyBuild Games. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, so I am Mike Rose. I am from tinyBuild Games. I used to write about video games for a very, very long time. And now I work with tinyBuild, who of course is a developer and publisher, and I try to find games to publish, and I shout a lot because I'm British, so you'll get used to that. So what I am going to talk about today is the various platforms that are currently available and the sorts of sales that you can safely assume that you will manage to get if you launch on said platforms. So of course the problem right now is that it is incredibly difficult to sell games. There are so many that are coming out at the moment. I used to write for a blog called indiegames.com, which you may or may not know of. I started writing there sort of back in 2009. And I remember when I was writing there, we probably received, I don't know, there was probably like a couple of games out every week, and we just covered everything because we had the time to cover every single smaller title that was coming out. And by the time I'd stopped writing about games, sort of mid last year, there was just kind of dozens and dozens of games coming out, like on PC every single week, and mobile is way more of a mess than that. So the problem now is that it's always been a case that you needed to know how to sell your games and how to market them properly, etc. But now even more than ever you do. So actually knowing the platforms, knowing them well enough that you know where to actually try and launch, where to strike first, etc., is incredibly valuable to know right now. So everyone keeps talking about an indie-pocalypse on Twitter at the moment. Some people say, no, there's an indie boom happening. It's not. It's all going to be fine. Don't worry about it. But of course, there's quite scary figures out there at the moment. There's the fact that by the end of 2015, there's nearly going to have been as many games launched on Steam just in 2015 as there have been for the entirety of Steam before that. I think it's something, I've got figures coming up later, but there's just thousands of games that have come out this year already. On mobile, there's hundreds of games coming out every single day. I think between iOS and Android, there's something ridiculous, like 500 games come out every single day. Of course, you don't hear about the vast majority of them, but the fact is that because that's the case, it makes it so much more difficult for you to actually rise above all of this, all of the noise. And of course, Steam Spy recently launched and has been providing us with scary figures for PC games. The median sales for games on PC now has just been dropping and dropping and dropping over the last 12 months. So it's all very scary, right? It makes you wonder that, is my game actually going to sell when it launches, etc. But I'm hopefully going to provide you with some figures now which will help you to understand better where you can hit and which platforms you should bother with, basically. Right, so I've been collecting digital sales data for a while now. Because I wrote about video games for so long, there's a lot of developers who are happy to share figures with me, sort of off the record. And of course, there's sites like Gamasutra, etc., where people write postmortems and they put up sales figures especially for mobile and PC. It's a little bit more difficult to find them for the consoles because the platform holders don't really want those numbers talked about. But either way, I've managed to get lots of sales data, and I'm going to try and help you to understand the different ranges that you can expect. I won't be talking about the last gen because there's no games coming out for it anymore, as you might expect. And I'm also not going to talk about free-to-play because in terms of talking about sales figures, it's pretty difficult to actually quantify those. And of course, a lot of the the kind of successful free-to-play stuff is from bigger companies who have giant marketing budgets, and I'm going to assume the vast majority of people who I'm talking to now are kind of don't have those numbers to hand really. So yeah, there's been a few indie success stories. So for example, the big one recently was Crossy Road, but I feel like if you were to look at Crossy Road and say, hey, I can do that as well, that would be a terrible idea. I mean, especially with Crossy Road, the backstory there is that the devs who made that game already have years and years of experience on mobile, and they have already had big successes on mobile, and they really, really know what they're doing, and they have the connections. So to try to be the next Crossy Road, I think would well, I think a lot of people try to do that, and I don't think it works out very well for them. So yeah, I won't be talking about free-to-play sales during this. So I'll just start with mobile. So just start with some figures. There are now 1 billion iOS devices out there. Just in 2014 alone, there was 130 kind of new registered iOS users. Of course, the thing with mobile is that just because they're iOS users doesn't mean that they play games. They might just be downloading apps, or they might just be using the phone. But still, it's a pretty good hit rate, even if it's a small percentage of those people. There's now 1.5 million apps on the App Store. I'm probably under-exaggerating that. It's probably a little bit more than that now. And Google Play is rapidly catching up with that. Like I mentioned earlier, there's hundreds of games coming out every single day, and probably in 2015 those figures are higher now. With mobile, iOS is still very much kind of the platform that you want to get on. Android is rapidly catching up, but of course there's problems with like piracy, for example, and it's been kind of proven time and time again that Android users kind of aren't as susceptible to paid games. They'd much rather download free stuff. But still, it's been, especially like for us as we've been putting stuff on mobile, we found that Android has done better for us than we were expecting. So yeah, it's worth definitely hitting up both, but iOS is where you want to really be trying to get Apple's attention and trying to get the features, of course. So again, this is when I'm trying to do sales figures here, I'm going to be splitting them up into 3 different categories. The top one that you can see is where I think most people who launch games on mobile are going to end up lying. So for the vast majority of developers, you're going to be getting less than 2,000 sales. And that will happen if you don't get a feature on the App Store, essentially. App Store feature is incredibly important now. It's pretty much the main way that people who are playing mobile games are going to care about your game. You can get all of the mobile press you want, and you should be getting the mobile press because it's one of the ways that Apple is going to care, and they might actually give you a feature. But actually just getting a hit from someone like Touch Arcade or Pocket Gamer, you're not going to see any kind of sales spike there. Nor are you from reviews, etc. So it's all about trying to get the feature, really. If you manage to get the feature, then the chances are you're going to fall into the middle category. Of course, they can only feature so many games every week, and if there are hundreds launching every single day, then you can imagine that the vast majority of mobile games fall into the top category. If you manage to really kind of get Apple's attention and they start giving you multiple features in all the various different slots that they have, and you're kind of keeping your game up to speed, you're putting out a bunch of updates, then it may very well manage to get into the bottom category there, which is incredibly wide because there's just there's so few games that make it, basically, especially just indie titles. So yeah, you're most likely, when you're thinking about mobile, you've got to think about the risk, essentially. You've got to think, well, I've got to assume I'm going to get in the top category there and work my way from there. So is it going to be worth it? Am I going to have to start thinking multi-platform about this? So yeah, these are just kind of a roundup of the things I've just been saying. I mean, the other thing you've got to think about as well is the fact that if you're launching a mobile game compared to, say, a PC game, a mobile game is going to be, you know, kind of a few bucks, several bucks, compared to on PC where you can launch at sort of $10. So, of course, that kind of means that you only need to sell half as much on PC to match mobile. And the other thing as well with mobile is that you really need to be thinking about the kind of longevity of your game. So you need to be thinking about updates that you can put out for it, ways that you can keep people talking about it, hopefully ways that Apple can keep looking at it and thinking about featuring it again. So the question of how do you actually get featured on the App Store? So I see a lot of developers who they make their mobile game, and then they kind of get to the end and they're all burnt out and they think, right, that's it. I gotta put this thing out now and it's gonna be fine. Apple will see it. It'll be great. They'll think it's amazing. They'll feature it. But that's kind of absolutely not how it works. It sometimes works. There are small numbers of games that works for. I see them just put it out and it creates such buzz at launch that Apple just can't ignore it. But for the vast majority of games, the developers have built up a rapport where they have managed to get Apple's attention and they've made sure that Apple have cared about their game. So I would say if you're going to try and do this, which you definitely should if you're making a mobile game, you should leave around 2 months for it. So you should think from the point when your game is finished, you should then leave a 2-month chunk of time when you are going to do all of these things to try and make Apple care. So like I mentioned, getting mobile press is a great way to make Apple care. If you do things like if you run a beta period, just like a closed beta on the Touch Arcade forums, that works fantastic because not only you get creating a bit of buzz, but you're getting a bit of feedback as well. There might be things that you missed, kind of really simple things as well that you just didn't think about. Using test flight for this kind of things, of course, is going to get Apple's attention. And just sort of iterating as well. So if Apple actually give you feedback on the game prior to launch, it's a really good idea to follow that feedback. So yeah, all of these things can really help. I think we've really noticed as well is that Apple always have this kind of secret presence at PAX. So just like PAX East and PAX Prime, etc. They've always got someone who's just sneaking around looking for mobile games. So if you have the resources to go to PAX and you have a mobile game, then it's a really good idea. Okay, so the Wii U now, which is going to be very different to what I've just been talking about. So there's 10 million of them out there. It's actually quite an amazing number of smaller titles that have been launching on Wii U. It's just you kind of don't really hear about it. So in 2014, there was round about 80 titles that you would class as indie that came out on Wii U. This year there's going to be more. I've kind of counted it up, and there's around about the same amount have launched already. And of course, you've kind of still got the Christmas period to come. So Nintendo are definitely ramping up on that kind of thing, kind of talking to smaller developers on Wii U. And if you can get a feature from Nintendo and work with them to get on the front of the eShop, it can work out okay for you. I mean, if I move to the sales now, you can see compared to the mobile sales, they're a little bit scary. So I've talked to a bunch of people who released on Wii U. And maybe the game wasn't too fantastic, and they didn't do a very good job of talking about it, and in return, Nintendo didn't really put much effort in either, and they've sort of sold in the hundreds. I think there's situations as well where a game has already been on multiple other platforms before, and so Nintendo don't feel so much like pushing the game. They feel like it's kind of, we're like the third or fourth platform for this game now. We're not going to bother giving them a banner. So yeah, I mean, if you spend the time making a Wii U game and obviously you get less than 1,000 sales, that's less than optimal. There are a lot of developers who are saying that they'd gone on other platforms, and then they sort of used the moderate success they'd had on other platforms to then just pay someone else to port it over to Wii U, and that seemed to work out quite well for them. But you can see that even if you have like great success on Wii U, it still kind of pales, the sales kind of still pale in comparison to other platforms. And the problem as well with the Wii U is that from everyone I talk to, sales seem to die off pretty quickly. So if you get featured, that's great. You get, you know, a few thousand sales from that. But then the moment you're not featured anymore, it just drops off. I guess it's an issue with the eShop. I don't know if anyone's ever tried using the eShop on Wii U, but it's not optimal. There's not many opportunities for kind of discount sales and things as well. So obviously, on Steam, for example, everyone sort of knows by now that when the Steam sales roll along, that's a great way to kind of bump up revenue on games. But Nintendo don't seem to provide as many sort of opportunities for that kind of thing. But like I say, I talked to plenty of people who are actually pretty positive about it, and they said that launching on Wii U worked really well as kind of a supplementary release to launching on another platform before that. So I would say it's definitely worth looking into, especially if you're making like a Unity game and it's not going to be a giant amount of hassle, then yeah, it's definitely kind of looking into the figures on that and trying to work out if it's going to be worth it for you. Because the fact is that even if you break even and you don't make any money on it, you've still now got a game on a Nintendo platform, which is pretty cool. I think everybody would kind of like to be on a Nintendo platform, really, regardless of whether it makes a bunch of money or not. So it may or may not be worth it, depending on how you feel about that. So the 3DS is interesting in comparison to the Wii U. So obviously the 3DS has been around a while longer. There's 53 million of them out there. And yet in comparison, so last year there was about 15 titles, which again I class as indie, that came out on the 3DS. And this year there's been around about the same amount. So I would imagine it's probably going to end up on about 20 to 25 by the end of the year. Which of course is kind of nothing compared to the like nearly 100 that were that's going to be on the Wii U by the end of this year. But in comparison, the sales figures are kind of far nicer to look at, really. If you don't really, people I talked to who said that you don't really have to put any effort into the marketing or anything, just being on the store is good enough to sort of get up to 5,000 sales, which is pretty great for doing not a great amount of work in the marketing area. If you do manage to get the feature with Nintendo, and especially as well, it seems if you've managed to have success elsewhere, so the kind of the name of your game is elsewhere, and people spot it on the eShop and think, hey, that would be pretty cool to play on a handheld. That seems to be able to work to bump up sales as well. And then there's a number of games as well that Nintendo have heavily pushed as, sort of being 3DS games, something like SteamWorld Dig, for example. Those kind of games, if they're getting really big exposure from Nintendo, can see pretty amazing sales, especially compared to Wii U. And the 3DS as well, in comparison to the Wii U, actually seems to have a pretty good sales tail. It doesn't just drop off like it does on the Wii U. Again, I would say it seems like it's just down to the fact that because the 3DS has been around a while and they've iterated on the 3DS eShop for a while, then it means that there's a lot more people who are using their 3DS who are visiting the eShop, and they're seeing a lot of different games. There's so many different categories on there. They actually do like discount sales on the 3DS. So yeah, it seems like maybe the Wii U could learn something there. I don't know if Nintendo are actually going to apply that, but we'll have to see. The big problem, it seems, and the reason why there aren't as many games on 3DS is that porting games to the 3DS is actually just a logistical nightmare in a lot of circumstances, especially it seems if your game is a Unity game. they're kind of they're trying to do Unity on 3DS at the moment, and it seems to be taking them a while. And I'm not hearing great murmuring about that. But if you're able to do this, it seems like it can be pretty fantastic for you. And a lot of the devs as well who I talk to who have put games on 3DS and then actually paid a company to make Japanese ports for them, just a Japanese port of their game, all of those people said that sales in Japan exceeded anything that they'd assumed would happen. So if you're going to go down this road, it seems like that would possibly be also an extra avenue to explore. So getting dev kits for both the 3DS and the Wii U, there's the kind of fabled Wario World website that you can go on and you can apply for a kit there, and maybe you'll hear back, maybe you won't. But the best way, it seems, to kind of make Nintendo care about your game is to actually go to events and be very loud about your game. So things like the Indie Mega booth, at the PAXs and Eurogamer Expo, etc. It seems, we've seen Nintendo walking around those kind of things and chatting with developers. If you go to events, like I went to Unite Europe recently, and Nintendo had a presence there, and there were a lot of developers going over and chatting about their games and the possibilities of getting dev kits. So if you are looking to get on Nintendo platforms, it seems like it would be a very good idea to actually go to things if you have the resources to do that, and try and make a connection with someone from Nintendo there. So PlayStation. So I'm going to be calling it PlayStation rather than PS4 because there's the PS Vita, and of course the Vita isn't selling as well as the PS4, but at the same time you can't really discount the idea that there are people buying games for the Vita. And of course there's a lot of the cross-buy stuff where, if someone buys it for PS4, they get it for Vita and so on. So it's a little bit iffy and trying to work out when I've been talking to developers, asking them, how much they'd sold. They can't really say, someone bought it for Vita or they bought it for PS4. So I actually was kind of surprised by the numbers of games coming out on PS4 that are smaller, because obviously you hear a lot about PlayStation as the place for indie games right now, but actually from what I found there's a lot more smaller games coming out on Xbox right now. I think I'll come with those figures soon, but it seems like actually Xbox seems to be doing a pretty great job of getting the small developers right now. PlayStation, it seems like they'll have maybe just slightly more smaller games this year, by the end of this year, than they did last year. But of course, the sales figures are pretty nice to look at. If you put a game out on PlayStation, the top numbers there are kind of what you can expect if you don't really put the effort in and Sony don't really help you out very much. Once you start getting the kind of push from Sony, so once you start getting the posts on the PlayStation blog and the tweets and the trailers and the kind of showcasing at various events, then you start to the kind of sales figures start to ramp up to numbers that you'd really be hoping for. And then, of course, there's been a number of cases recently where people have done pretty clever things. So, for example, if you take a game like Rocket League, they did a pretty nice, I think I talk about this on the next slide actually, they did a pretty nice sort of launch on PlayStation Plus for free and at the same time launch on PC sort of deal. And of course, the millions of people downloading it for PlayStation then has then rolled over into PC. So there's a lot of clever things to be done there. The great thing about PS Plus as well is that from a lot of developers that I've talked to over the years is that it can be really good as a signal boost later on. So kind of months down the line after your game sales have started to tail off, and maybe you're moving on to the next game, you can use it as a sort of, we'll announce our next game at the same time that we go free on PlayStation Plus, and that can work out incredibly well for you. And of course, PlayStation Other than, they seem to have adopted the Steam sales kind of thing. So there's a lot of sales that go on PlayStation. You see them on the PlayStation blog all the time, and there's a lot of things to get involved with there that can kind of help you to spike a little bit more. Getting a PlayStation dev kit seems a little bit easier than getting a Nintendo dev kit, although it seems to depend on the time of year. So of course you can self-publish on PlayStation, but you're going to need a dev kit first. When the PS4 had first come out, there just seemed to be a lot of tweeting at people from PlayStation, and them saying, yeah, sure, we'll give you a dev kit. And then like a week later, people were, kind of tweeting pictures of dev kits, which was fantastic. But then it seems like as the life of the PlayStation 4 has gone on, then it's still happening, but it seems to be happening less. And I mean, fair play to Sony. They did an incredible job of pushing that in the first place, and it created an incredible message. But I mean, if you want to try and get a dev kit now, it seems like you can do things like the same with Nintendo, kind of, attending events and talking to Sony there. Or you can just be tweeting at people. So there's this guy, Shahid, who works in the UK office, who seems to do a pretty amazing job of getting dev kits out to people. But like I say, it seems to depend on the time of year and what's going on at the time. So you might need to continue to push for that in ways. So PC then. So of course this is going to be an interesting one. So there are 125 million accounts on Steam. I'm going to be talking mainly about Steam because, as I'm sure you're aware, Steam is pretty much PC. There are other platforms as well, like Good Old Games and Humble. But from the people I talk to, they seem to sort of pale in comparison. We're talking sort of less than 10% of PC sales seem to come from those platforms, which of course means it's still worth going on those platforms and it's still worth putting in a little bit of effort, but you really want to be focusing on the Steam launch at least at first. So the numbers of games coming out on PC right now is, as I mentioned earlier, pretty scary. When I was writing for Gama Sutra, I was tracking these numbers for a while, and just the graphs that you can create from these numbers is incredibly scary. I'm sure if you read all the Steam Spy stuff, all the analysis he's been putting out recently, it's pretty great. But yeah, I mean, at the start of this year, there was about 7 new games being released every day, which was already pretty tricky. Now there's about 10 new games coming out every day. So on the day when you release your game, there are 9 other developers all trying to climb up that popular new releases chart at the same time as you. And some of them might have more resources than you, and maybe you'll release, on a day or in a week when there's some giant AAA game coming out, which is going to destroy you. So things like trying to work out a good release date that doesn't clash with something horrible is a good idea as well. And of course on PC, as I mentioned, the kind of you get your launch spike, but of course then there's plenty of other spikes you can come across as well if you're savvy enough. So during kind of Christmas sales on Steam, if you can get big YouTubers to be covering your game. So the numbers for PC are even more stretched out than they were on mobile. And of course, the thing to know about these numbers, this is for smaller developers and kind of mid-tier developers. Of course, there's giant companies like Rockstar and like CD Projekt who can sell millions, and that's fantastic. But I think to be more realistic for smaller developers who don't have the marketing budgets, these are the kind of figures that you'll be looking at. And there's been a worryingly large number of developers recently who have been putting out kind of numbers where they've sold in the small hundreds on PC. I mean, the problem there, of course, is that you're always going to get the people who sell okay-ish aren't going to make these blog posts, and the people who sell badly are going to make them. So it kind of skews it there. But regardless, like I say, I've been talking to dozens and dozens of devs. who have been putting out games on PC recently, and these are the sort of numbers you can look at, and they're, like I say, incredibly stretched. If you start to get YouTubers and Twitch streamers caring about your game, that's when you're just golden. Like, that's when you can start to put a bit of a smile on your face. It seems less and less like the getting press for the game matters anymore. The reason to get press for the game now is pretty much so that YouTubers and Twitch streamers are going to actually spot it and start playing the game. And of course, then you hear about the big success stories that are in the high end, but of course, there's fewer and fewer of those now. When they do happen, it's a big deal. Everybody's talking about the game because it's managed to do this thing that everybody else wants to do. But it does happen, just maybe not to as many people as we would hope. So yeah, there's things as well, like on PC, you're able to, of course, go in the various bundles that there are, and that can help to stretch the life of your game. If you manage to get into a Humble bundle, for example, that's pretty fantastic. And of course, PC is one of the only platforms that offers kind of early access as well, which can be really, really useful, actually. There's a lot of people who sort of talk about why early access is being ruined by developers who are kind of putting games that have a few levels, have only like 10 minutes of content, and just kind of pulling in money there. But actually, I've always been a massive fan of early access, and like since I've joined tinyBuild, there's a few tinyBuild games that are in early access, and early access is amazing for just building up a community for your game, especially if your game is the type where it's not so much this game is 5 hours long style game. It's more of a we can play many hours of this game. Something like speedrunners, for example. It's the kind of game that has really flourished in early access because it's able to build up this community around it. And if it had just launched and not been in early access, you don't know if that would have been able to occur. So if we're able to do that kind of thing with early access and build up a community through just directly through Steam, etc., then it can be really useful for you. So getting on Steam at the moment is interesting and has been for a while. So Greenlight, which I'm sure you're aware of, the process for applying to get on Steam, it's been a very interesting road for Greenlight, and it seems like Steam don't even really know what they're doing with Greenlight anymore. But from the number of developers who I've talked to recently who have kind of blasted through Greenlight quickly, sort of in the space of a month or less, it seems like they managed to do it relatively easily. It seems like as long as you are, during the development of your game, doing the things that you should be doing and building up the marketing presence and making sure that people care and building a community, then Greenlight will just happen for you. Even if it happens slowly, you'll make it eventually. The other way, of course, is to go with a publisher. There's so many indie publishers like ourselves who are around right now and who will just offer entry to Steam as part of publishing with you. I've been hearing of some deals recently, especially from some kind of bigger devs, where there have been publishers who have essentially said, we'll take this small cut of your game just to give you access to Steam. Just don't do that. That's a terrible, terrible idea. Like I say, getting through Greenlight really isn't that hard. If you're going to go and do that with a publisher in the first place, then you might as well just use that effort to just make your way through Greenlight. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with Greenlight soon. It might kind of collapse around them, or they might replace it with something else. But right now, actually getting onto Steam through Greenlight doesn't seem like that big of a hassle, as long as you know what you're doing. Right, so Xbox One. So there are 12.8 million shipped. They don't give sales figures, but I think it's safe to assume that it's probably over 10 million by now. So last year, there were about 20 indie titles that came out. And this was just when I think Idea Xbox, their self-publishing, had kind of just started about midway through last year. And this year there have been about 45, and it looks like they'll probably reach about 60 by the end of the year. So they'll be kind of matching PlayStation, which is kind of fantastic, really. I mean, a lot of the Idea Xbox events that they're doing, and especially things that like we've got involved in, are actually pretty fantastic, and they're really kind of pushing their smaller titles. Which is something I think that a lot of people have been waiting for on Xbox One for a while now, especially after the incredible job that they did on the 360. So sales figures, they're pretty much not too far off from PlayStation's, a little bit lower, but you'd kind of expect that given that, you know, there's about twice as many PS4s out there as there are Xbox Ones. But yeah, you know, you want to be essentially talking a lot to Microsoft during this process, because you really need kind of the multiple features on the Xbox dashboard. Press actually seems to matter for console games compared to where it doesn't so much on PC and mobile. But there's kind of a lot of different things that you can do. So I actually talked to a couple of devs who have been doing, you know, there's the games with gold, so where people are paying their gold subscription, and it's a little bit like PS Plus. They get free games and they get discounts. And even though that has been slow to ramp up, it seems like it's actually working out quite well for some devs now. And I talked to one dev actually who had launched as a Games with Gold game with like a 20% discount when he'd launched his game, and he'd seen pretty fantastic sales from that. So if you were going to launch on Xbox One anytime soon, it might be a good idea to explore that avenue. Getting a Xbox One dev kit, you can sign up at Idea Xbox, but again, just like with Nintendo and with Sony, it's so much better if you actually go and find someone from Microsoft and talk to them. And again, it's the same story, just getting the name out about your game, applying for all the different showcases that are happening, the Indiecades and the IGFs, etc. Just generally just trying to get your name out there, and then just cornering a Microsoft person at some kind of like after party, etc. Then that seems to be most of the stories that I hear from smaller developers. Yeah, I managed to find this person from Microsoft and throw their card at me, and they gave me one, and then I emailed them back and forth, and I managed to get a dev kit out of that. So yeah, that seems to be the main avenue, especially for the consoles, to go down to get these things. Right, so I'll just do a wrap up basically of everything I've just said, because I said way too many things. So for mobile, if you're going down the mobile route right now, you need to be aiming for that App Store feature, because if you don't get it, then it's probably not going to go very well for you. So you need to think of all the different things that I was saying about earlier about trying to get featured. Wii U, I wouldn't say it was a good idea to go there first. The people who I talked to who did that didn't seem to have come out of it quite well, but it does seem like in many circumstances it's worth porting games to Wii U. 3DS seems to offer up some pretty great sales, but the actual getting a game on the platform in the first place might be where you get stuck. PlayStation seems to be the one where everyone says, oh, that's where you should go right now. And it's kind of true, but at the same time, I wouldn't be discounting Xbox at the moment, because they seem to be kind of rapidly ramping it up. And on Steam, it's not as risky as mobile, and I wouldn't ever tell someone not to go for a PC game, but you need to really be thinking about what it is that makes your game on PC different to everybody else's, because the chances are that Valve are not going to help you sell this game. They might give you, you might get bumped up the little popular new releases chart on the front page on launch day. But kind of after that, you're on your own. So you need to be thinking about what it is that is going to make people care more about your game than everybody else's, as kind of brutal as it sounds. And if you sort of need some tips with other things like talking to the press and getting streamers and YouTubers, etc., to kind of care about your game, these are all different things I've done in the past. So the top two are articles I've written when I used to write about video games, and the bottom one is a talk that I gave at GDC in San Francisco early this year, which generally covers stats for, I basically interviewed a bunch of different YouTubers and Twitch streamers to find out what it is that they are looking for in games right now and why they may or may not care to play your game. Right, okay, I think I talked way too much there, so thank you very much for listening. Oh yeah, if anybody has any questions, I have these sheep to throw at you. They're from one of our games. They're kind of brutal, actually. They come apart, and you can see the insides of them, which is, they're pretty special. So if anybody has a question, I'm going to lob one of these at you. I only have 4 of them, though. Oh, there's a question. Oh, I'm not going to be able to throw that far. This is going to be embarrassing.
I'll challenge you. Thanks for also touching on mobile. I did have a question about mobile premium sales. Do you see a difference or have an advice about the price point? You know, is there a big difference between 99 cents, 1.99? Do you have some advice about that?
Yeah. Yeah. So with the price point on mobile is interesting. We've been experimenting a little bit, and we've been talking to Apple as well. Apple, it seems from talking to a lot of different developers, are very keen for price points to rise. I think that they're a little bit sick of people talking about the race to the bottom, and they want to, and you'll have seen it as well, you know, on the App Store recently, there's a lot more kind of higher prices. Whether that's working or not, I'm not so sure. It seems like there's a price point now that most mobile players are happy to pay, and it seems like that's around about $3 right now. Again, if you don't get the feature on the App Store, it doesn't seem to matter what you price it. But yeah, the thing to remember as well, of course, is that on mobile you want to leave yourself wiggle room to drop the price at later dates, whether that's price cuts or whether it's a permanent drop. It seems like $3 or $4 seems to be working right now. But having said that, there's been a number of games that have come out kind of $5 and $6, and from what I've seen, have sold incredibly well. So it's a tricky question to answer. It's a perception thing as well, right? Sometimes you see a game and you think, wow, that looks like $5 worth. And then other times you see a game and it might have just as much content and be just as much fun as the other game, but it looks like a $3 game. So that was a terrible answer. But yeah.
Thanks for the speech.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, throw the
the
sheet.
worst. Have you ever seen a British person throw? Hey, that was nearly there. That was good. Thanks very much.
Do you know of any genres currently trending in the indie scene who are very popular? In
Genres?
Genres, you know. Yeah.
For what platform?
PC mainly. I mean, on Steam, for example.
Yeah. So there seems to be specific genres that are doing quite well at the moment. We keep making jokes about how we should make like a survival horror. You know, just all of the ones that are doing well. Just take everything from like DayZ and Five Nights at Freddy's and just call it good. Yeah, I mean, it seems like there are certain genres that just continue to do well, especially for smaller developers, that are actually within the scope of what someone can manage. So for example, like roguelikes have just always done well, and roguelike likes and roguelike likes. But yeah, there's a lot of games like that which seems to do well. It seems that it's becoming harder and harder to sell the kind of standard platformer. There's been a lot of posts recently where developers have said, oh, I released this 2D platform and I don't understand why it didn't do very well. And then you you look at the videos of the game and the pictures, and I think it's become difficult to understand what is interesting about those kind of games, right? We've seen so many of them now, and there's so many coming out all the time that at a glance, it's really difficult to sell those kind of games now. Having said that, I wouldn't put anybody off making them because I love those kind of games. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend just like chasing genres as well, right? Like it seems like there's a lot of people who try and do that. They go, hey, this kind of game is working out really well for us, and they make some awful thing that in certain circumstances still sells, which is terrible. But no, I see more and more the advice from people that seems to work for people. Just make the thing that you want to make, right? And that seems to work out for most people. When they, actually get the look that we're all chasing. So, yeah. You can have a sheep. This should be a bit easier. Nice. That was pretty slick. Any more?
I have another question.
Oh, yes, hello.
A couple of years ago, when I was working at 11-Bit Studios and we were doing a strategy game, we heard this advice while talking with Apple guys that it would support the arguments of being featured game, and eventually we did achieve that, to actually add some features that are actually trending or will be pushed by Apple itself for those devices. So at that time, that was the attachment for the gamepad so that you can actually make a joystick out of your iPhone. That was a pretty weird idea, and actually while doing RTS game, we added this feature to the game, which was like totally redundant to it, but just like to, please the guys, and because it was said that it would support the arguments of being featured. I was wondering whether there are some trends that could actually right now support those developers to have the more ammunition to actually convince Apple guys to be featured.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about a lot of these things. I remember when the Apple Watch had just come out, and there were a lot of developers who had kind of jumped on it. Apple had been talking to them before that came out, and they'd been making smaller games for that. But then I read a bunch of things afterwards where all those developers said like, kind of really wasn't worth it. I remember reading from Bossa, who make a surgeon simulator, and they'd made an Apple Watch game, and it didn't seem to have done so well for them. But having said that, it's then a case of, well, Bossa have now supported Apple in this launch of this new device. So now you would imagine that going into the future, Bossa are now going to it be in a favorable light with Apple. So yeah, it's very much a case of, to put it bluntly, like ass kissing. Just like, yeah, I'm going to help Apple out with it. I'm going to go with, be one of the first developers on this new Apple platform, and maybe they'll look favorably on me later. So, like you say, with the controller stuff, it seemed like a number of developers did that as well, and that seemed to work quite well for them. So yeah, if you're in a position to do that, and you already you already have the fallback for it, then yeah, it's probably worth going with. So. Oh, do you want a sheep? There you go. Nice. Okay, I've got one more sheep. Who wants the last sheep? Yes.
I have a question. Thank you very much for a very useful presentation. I'm working in Kyiv for Ubisoft Studio. We are responsible for PC versions of AAA games, and what we noticed that a lot of indie programmers, they're quite enthusiastic and they have passion about the games in general, but for us it's very difficult to find any reliable relationship with them. So do you think is it necessary to promote collaboration between big titles and big companies and IPs, Ubisoft, for example, and some events like this, and how to promote it, how to raise the bar of technical expertise of indie developers in general?
I kind of didn't get the question.
So
you mean
how to promote this collaboration, if you think it should be
you mean
promoted?
a collaboration between like you and
Big
and
companies, big titles with stability, expertise, huge technical opportunities, and passionate game developers, but without all these advantages. You see, so they would like to
Yeah.
help us to be involved in big APs, but they don't have this expertise at all. But they have passion, and
Yeah.
they're quite enthusiastic. How to combine this?
That's a good question. I mean, you don't see it much, right? I don't know. I guess part of it is trying to actually understand the kind of indie community. So it used to be a lot easier. There used to be plenty of places where you could kind of talk to a bunch of these people. It's still actually around, but there used to be a place called TigSource, where you could really get a feel for that, and you could really talk to these people. Nowadays, because there's so many games coming out, it makes it a lot more difficult. But the actual working with smaller studios, I think you've seen things like, especially when like Devolver came along, right? Like a publisher. And I think they were kind of like one of the first, like years and years ago, to seem to kind of do this bridging a gap style thing that was kind of missing, where there were smaller developers who had this passion, like you were saying, but they didn't really know how to actually then go and take that all the way. And I think that, I think you saw that gap being bridged very, very slowly. I think it's still happening, and I think it needs to happen faster. But like for us, for example, like we're really trying to help that, because with the stuff that I've been doing, so like I said, I've been writing about video games for a long time, and one of the main things I always wanted to do, and I really cared about, was getting a lot of these smaller titles out to people, right? And for me, it was always a massive passion whenever I managed to, whenever a developer came to me and said, because you talked about my game and because you talked to me about things I should be doing, I managed to get to A, B, and C. That was always kind of fantastic for me. So now with what I'm doing at tinyBuild, it's really kind of exciting to be able to see that firsthand, to be able to take someone like you say who has these incredible games. So there's like a game I'm working on, like as a producer at the moment, where I've played this guy's games before and I've always loved what he does, but I know that in the past he's found it difficult to sell games and he's not been able to do that so well. So for me to be able to now actually get involved with him and help people care about his games is kind of fantastic. So I guess I think you're seeing that happen with a lot of people like us, and I think there must be about a dozen kind of indie publishers at the moment. But it's happening slowly, and I think it's going to probably be like the next big thing that's going to happen over the next couple of years. So I hope that answered your question. Here, have a sheep in case it didn't. Nice. Right, is that it? We're done. Okay, thank you very much, everybody.